approaches to it.
So I sent that to them
Thank
saying,
you.
hey, it works. You know,
Oh,
so
that's
it's a really
fabulous.
good example.
That is fabulous. Good morning, everyone. Get folks up here. There we go. Nicole, come on up. All right. Well, good morning. Thank you all for taking time out of your day to get here. We are grateful for it. Tim Walz, the congressman from the 1st Congressional District, and I'm joined by a group of innovators. You're going to meet a couple of mayors. We've got some city managers here, and we've got the folks that actually build our communities. And we're here to talk about a piece of legislation, and the title is the Small Town and Regional Vitality Investment Act. But we're here to talk about a different way of doing governance. And I think in a time of frustration, of gridlock, of frustration of things that seem disconnected to where our communities are impacted, this is a piece of legislation. I'll give you just a little bit of background on it, how this came about. It was written by the people who are standing here and literally thousands of others. After the 2016 election, I asked my team and myself, we need to go out and get into every community because it was pretty apparent, not just because of election results, but there was an angst in the country and a frustration with the way things were being done. That was pretty obvious to everybody. My question was, what do they want to see from their federal, state, local governments? What do they want to see in their communities that brings that vitality? Especially as we saw, and the narrative that came out of that election is rural America had angst. Rural America wanted to know what we could do to invest in them. So we set out on a series of town halls. We had countless roundtables amongst community leaders. We had numerous one-on-ones that accumulated in bringing in experts on agendas that were written by the folks that were here and those leaders in the 1st Congressional District with 3 vitality summits on looking at the economics of what was happening in rural America, looking with futurists of what the projections was going to be 50 years into the future, and ways that we could ensure the vitality that is out there continued and the areas we were struggling. And those are the same things that you hear time and time again. How do we attract and retain the businesses? How do we attract and retain the best quality workforce? How do we find housing for them? How do we find daycare for them? How do we fix aging infrastructure, water infrastructure plans, when the state gives us mandates on discharge limits and no money to reach them? How do we go about doing that? And this is a product, and you're going to hear some of the specifics on how it's implemented, that makes the federal government responsible to the local elected officials, that takes approximately $10 to $12 billion, as we're going to talk about how this works, in terms of a grant process that touches into these communities of 30,000 or smaller, which, by the way, has communities in all 87 Minnesota counties that would be eligible for this, working with local priorities and working through existing economic development agencies to get that money to these communities to impact the projects that they want to see impacted in a way that provides oversight and streamlined ability to get that to them. We know that there's many projects that are funded through things like USDA rural development. And when you're in rural America, USDA rural development is critical. They do great work. We've done different programs with this. We've been able to do things other than building grocery stores to helping with daycares, but they're very time consuming, it's very limited, and it's not as targeted as we needed it to be with these communities. And so this is a product of citizen-written legislation. This is a product of countless 18 months approximately, literally thousands of meetings through the local leadership, that when we came to this and we asked people to take a look at this, I think you're going to hear from some of them, this is exactly what will work in rural America. this is exactly what will lead to that vitality. This is exactly what will streamline the process between interface between federal, state, and local government, and it will also re-inspire folks that they have a hand in their communities. And so I'm proud to introduce this. We're going to do all we can to make this happen. But what I would tell you is, and I think you'll hear from them, that it's changing our approach to how we see government should deliver services. It's changing the approach of how we partner in a way that makes sense. It's changing it in a way that cuts down some of the burdens onto the local communities, and it lets these community leaders and these folks who are up here to do the work do exactly what they do best, respond quickly and smartly to their community's needs. So we're glad you're here. We're going to hear from a few of these, and we'll be glad to take questions at the end. But I'm really proud to introduce a mayor of an incredible community, one with a strong legacy of manufacturing, one with a strong legacy of innovation, and that's Mayor Tom Steen from the city of Austin.
Good morning, my name is Tom Steen. I've been the mayor of Austin for 12 years, and we're excited about this bill. We've worked with the congressman and his staff for about 18 months, inputting information that they've used to develop this bill. On last Monday on the 16th, Austin was the first city in Minnesota to pass a resolution in support of this bill. So we're proud of that. This bill is going to help us face issues. Right now, rural Minnesota, at least in Austin, are facing issues that are almost insurmountable. We're getting mandates from the state that says we have to upgrade our sewage treatment plant, possibly, one estimate's at $77 million. Well, where's a city like Austin going to get $77 million? And hopefully this bill will help us with that. Housing, I think, is another rural issue. We haven't built a new market rate housing project since the 60s, doesn't it, Craig? 60s. And we're in dire need. A lot of rural Minnesota is. I think these are problems that are all over the state, but are really hitting rural Minnesota a little bit harder than most of them. We hope that this legislation will help us. It allows for a federal partnership for rural communities like Austin to be able to financially address challenges in housing, childcare, wastewater infrastructure, and other local priorities in an efficient, non-bureaucratic way. And we appreciate that the Congressman Matt brought this forward for us. We thank you.
Thanks, Tom. You're also going to hear, and the issue all of you familiar with Greater Minnesota, that our regional centers, our regional vitality, all go hand in hand. So when we talk about making Highway 14 4-lane, the Highway 14 Coalition is made up of mayors from New Ulm over to Rochester. And when those two stand together, when all of those mayors up and down there understand that when we do a piece of that highway, even if it's over by Owatonna, that increases the economic viability of New Ulm. And so this piece of legislation was very much thought through and crafted in a way that took in our regions, took in our regional vitality. And with that, I want to introduce you Nicole Grundrick-Nicholson, the Executive Director of the Region 9 Development Corporation in southern Minnesota. So Nicole?
Good morning. As the Congressman stated, my name is Nicole Grundrick-Nicholson. I'm the Executive Director of Region 9 Development Commission, which is located in Mankato. And we serve the 9 counties of South Central Minnesota, as well as 72 cities, 147 townships, and 33 school districts. In addition to Region 9, I also serve as the president of the Greater Minnesota Partnership, and I serve on the national board representing the Midwest for the National Association of Development Organizations. So as the Congressman and the Mayor had also referenced, I'm really excited about this bill because it really gives small town elected officials and community leaders the flexibility. All too often, these programs are too narrowly focused. So for instance, a lot of substance abuse programs are focused just on opioid prevention, which is good. However, it relates to telemedicine for communities of a certain size, and they're so specific, it's really a struggle to work with our communities to maneuver through certain programs for Greater Minnesota. Representing a development commission, along with my peers throughout Minnesota, we are working with the Department of Commerce's Federal Economic Development Administration. Through that process of being federally designated as an economic development district, we annually update and review our comprehensive economic development strategy, our CEDS. What that means is that we go through a current process already as a planning organization to ensure that all of the elected officials, community leaders, and business leaders are working to help identify what strategies need to be in place to protect and continue the economic vitality of our regions. What I really appreciate about this legislation is that it is encouraging to go through the current process of the set to ensure that everyone's voice is heard and that the priorities are able to be identified from the local leaders versus a top-down approach, which we've seen all too often. And again, what I also like is that with this is identifying the 30,000 as a population. All too often there's entitlement dollars that only go to communities over 50,000 in size and or counties over 200,000 in size. And again, as the Congressman had stated, we have communities in all 87 counties in Minnesota that will be able to benefit from this direct program. Again, by using the sets, it also ensures that our leaders are thinking regionally, and that going through the county board program, that also ensures that our county board is helping take the leadership and has that local ownership of how the dollars would then be spent. All too often, we are recreating the wheel of the duplicative process. And then also, for just far too long, our rural and smaller communities have been left out of opportunities like this. The bill empowers local leaders to select those programs and again to prevent the grants from being too narrowly focused. Numerous mayors in our areas have expressed their need for legislation like this that is again flexible enough to help select what their priorities are. They know what the local priorities are for their growth and as well as to be resilient to meet their goals. Our region's priorities have included expansion of broadband, access to affordable and quality childcare, workforce housing, job creations, different specific programs along that for good-paying jobs, the need for growing substance abuse and recovery, as well as mental health and other crisis centers. This legislation recognizes these unique needs. Different examples that I wanted to highlight is most of you in the room realize that Region 9, we are directly involved with Medelia's fire recovery. At that time, a few years ago, when the February 3rd fire hit, there was frustration because no local, state, or federal programs really were able to directly assist the community of Medelia in Watonwan County. It's a small community of 2,236 individuals. We were able to be creative and work very uniquely to try to have some programs assist that community, and they're now doing very well with an economic resiliency plan in place. But also in Faribault County, in Blue Earth, the city of Blue Earth and Faribault County, Winnebago Manufacturing has told us time and time again the need for more programs to ensure that they can fill the welder positions, as there's good paying jobs that need to be filled. City of Sleepy Eye in Brown County, they're a unique example where funding like this could help them continue to preserve their baseball field, which is one of only 2 remaining in the country that Babe Ruth played at. Cities in Waseca County have also struggled with different water needs for their infrastructure. So whether it's century-old pipes underground and or water treatment plants, as the mayor of Austin also referenced, as well as and then flood mitigation, as the Waseca County has had severe flooding. So this program would also allow for those infrastructure improvements while also being flexible. The needs for airplane hangars at our regional airports has been mentioned. But what I appreciate again is that this is flexible enough, looking that while more airplane hangars may be needed, cities like Fairmont have said, you know, airplane hangars are great, but what we really need is we've created a program with our local high school, realizing there's going to be a pilot shortage. So they're working with the high school so those students can work on getting their private pilot's license. But at that airport, they need to be able to have a facility where they could do the ground school at the airport. To have community facilities that are so vital and unique to their needs. So again, I commend the Congressman and his team for being very forward-thinking, and again for letting the leaders of Southern Minnesota, like the mayors and county commissioners, for helping draft this legislation with the feedback that they have given. And I really applaud their team for continuing to listen to the constituents and the local elected officials at crafting this bill, because just too often our small communities are left behind. And again, with rural communities across Minnesota, we can tackle the challenges that we face if we work together to create the investment in things that matter most. Organizations like mine, Region 9, we help communities plan for their future, and this legislation will tie this planning to strategic investment that will improve small towns across the state. I greatly appreciate the acknowledgement of our needs of small communities. Thank you for being forward-thinking and ensuring our communities do not get left behind.
Wonderful. Gives you a great indication of the vitality that's out there and working closely with Nicole, both proactively and then, of course, after the fires in Medelia or flooding or the things that happen. But I want to stress again, as you start to see, when you work with mayors and when you're a member of Congress, they come to you and they tell you there were these things that need to be done. And it always ends with, we get to some place, but we can't do this because of this, but this won't work in that. And what you heard here is the trying to streamline this process, trying to make sure that it gives them the capacity to deal with all these things that make their community strong, and it's just smart investment. And I will have to say, a lot of this came out of experiences that we've had, and in introducing my good friend Roy Serp, the mayor of Waseca, a lot of times, and we see him, and you do a good job, you're out there and covering the stories. Waseca could have been that typical story that happens in rural America or greater Minnesota, that you have a major employer like Quad Graphics, used to be Brown Printing, hundreds of jobs in a community the size of Waseca is big. It's their biggest employer, it's out there, and the door's shut and everybody's laid off. So it ends up being the story of a dying communities and the picture of the shuttered plant closed type of thing. That's not how Roy viewed it. Roy knew that this was a change, he knew it was dang, but just like we do throughout Minnesota, we do in greater Minnesota, how do we turn this into something? How do we go about this? How do we use the resources necessary? So it's a lot of Roy's thinking, it's a lot of him pushing on these rural vitality summits, it's about pushing on these programs will not work in a situation like this. So the program needs to be changed. It's too tight, it's too small, and how do we do that? And I think it's that sense of hopefulness that's in greater Minnesota as people talk about what's going to be done with changing demographics and aging populations and a shortage of workforce or whatever. The solutions are going to come directly from those communities and those community leaders. Roy Serp from Waseca.
I'm very glad to have heard the word hope in what the congressman just said. That is what we all need, is hope. And I'm here to speak to you on more of a personal level. I've been in local government for 25 years. I started out as a city council person. I became a county commissioner, and then I was fortunate enough to be elected mayor of the city of Waseca. Small community, less than 10,000 people, but it typifies just exactly what this act calls for. And the congressman and his staff typify what this act calls for. We had not only the Quad Graphics closing, but we also had a wastewater treatment plant facility that was outdated and needed to be refurbished. The congressman was personally involved with that part of our process. Quad Graphics closed, yes. We had a 13.5-inch rainfall in Waseca 3 years ago, similar to what happened in Mora. I think more devastating, but nonetheless, for whoever it happens to, it's devastating. And the congressman has been there for all of those. And this act epitomizes and typifies what the congressman has been doing, coming out and doing the personal approach with the communities that he represents in the 1st Congressional District, and we as a small community appreciate that. This is something that I've looked forward to for a long time, and my constituency as well. I'm in southern Minnesota, and sometimes the district may be just a little bit on the unruly side, and maybe not pro-federal government, but this act will revitalize, rejuvenate, and invigorate our community, and it is just what we need. And the special part about this is, as a city official, working in city government, we probably had a tendency to, we're the city, they're the county. This bill, this act will cause us to be in this together, and that is so much what we need, and that is something that the congressman has strongly asked us to do, is think regionally, think statewide, and we're all in this together. And this, I couldn't be happier about this, and this is a dream come true for us in the city of Waseca. So we thank the congressman and his staff very much for what they're doing for this effort. Thank you.
Thanks, Roy. At the end of the day, it all creates jobs, and that's what people care about. We got the folks that will build our water treatment plants, that will build those daycare facilities, that will refurbish roads, do the things that we need to do. And those jobs, the closer they can stay in our communities, the more money that's spent in those communities. The vitality then becomes local, becomes regional, rather than the driving the hundreds of miles, as you will hear. And with that, we have the building trades folks here to talk, and I think Carly's here, Carly Moline, who's going to speak on behalf of the broad group of folks that build Minnesota. So,
good morning. Almost this afternoon. I'm Carly Moline. I'm with the State Building and Construction Trades Council. We're the advocate voice for 70,000 union construction workers statewide. We have 5 of them here today, 3 carpenters and 2 laborers, and I don't mean to put you guys on the spot, but if you could just say your name and local quickly, that would be great.
Eric Engstrom, Minneapolis, Local 563.
Carrie Robles, Local 563 laborers.
Sam Heimlich, Carpenters, 322.
Rick Dushaw, Local 1847, pile drivers.
Eric Gomez, Carpenters, 68.
Thank you. As I stated, we have 70,000 members statewide. We are divided into regional councils, including several in greater Minnesota: Duluth, the Iron Range, Northwest, Brainerd, Central, Southeast, and Mankato. In the construction industry, people go where the jobs are. What that means for a lot of people in the trades is that they have to leave their families for a couple of weeks at a time. They have to hit the road, they have to pay for gas, they have to pay for lodging, because they have to go where the work goes. What I love about Congressman Walz's proposal here is not only does it invest in communities in rural Minnesota and revitalize those communities, it means jobs for people that live locally, so that they're able to stay closer to home and work closer to home, and we think that that is a really important piece of this as well. As some of you know, in my former life, I represented a large portion of rural St. Louis and Itasca counties in the state legislature, and there's a number of communities that would benefit greatly from this proposal around the state. And I just want to touch a little bit on the child care piece. I think that is such an important part of this proposal. In greater Minnesota, it is so hard for young families to find access to child care. In the trades specifically, where people are working shift work, their normal workday doesn't necessarily fit into what we think of as a normal workday. That makes it even more difficult to find childcare for those workers. And so to have that as part of this proposal, I think is so important to all working Minnesotans, especially those that are in the trades. So I just want to thank Congressman Walz for bringing this forward.
Well, thank you all. We're excited about this. It's written the way it's supposed to be. It was ground up. It does things differently than we've had. I think it as Mayor Serp said, it forces us all to work together, federal, state, county, local, all in the interest of understanding that the challenges that are in greater Minnesota, in rural areas, are there. But once we address them, the paybacks we get and the benefits we get in terms of quality of life, jobs, and economic vitality are immense. And I just have to tell you, I think we structured this in a way as what I do with all of my pieces of legislation. This is going to be incredibly appealing to a large number of folks across the country. It's going to be incredibly appealing to rural Republicans in Mississippi, for example, who are facing the exact same problems in terms of the issues of aging infrastructure. And this actually puts a path in place. You're going to get not only the legislation, you'll get the sheet on this, the history of it, you'll get the funding stream that's on there, and the flow chart of how things are done. And for a government flow chart, it's pretty small actually on this one, but showing how we're going to interface with folks, we'll make sure you get all of those information. So with that, if you have any questions, we'd be glad to take them. Certainly glad you're here.
Well, Congressman, you have less than a half a year left in your term.
Yep.
And you're hoping you're going to be really busy, at least through November 6th, back here and beyond. What chance does this have to pass? It's late in the session.
Yeah.
New House comes in early next year.
No, it's a fair question, and I can't say never, but I rarely introduce anything that I don't think has started out with an end game in this. The same thing with the Forever GI Bill we got this year and a few of the other things. I think because of the election, and as you know, I'm not telling you anything new, this is the least productive Congress in American history, so very little. I think the trick to all of these pieces of legislation is to build bipartisan support on something that makes a huge impact on constituents. If I were going back and running, especially if I were in a rural area, I would take this piece of legislation and go with it. The purpose of this was written by the 21 counties of southern Minnesota. It applies to all 87, and it'll apply to all 2,800 across the country, if you will. That the last on this is that my assumption would be whoever has the privilege of representing the people of southern Minnesota after me, they will certainly be for this. So I have to be honest with you, Don, I think there's an opportunity for us to move some things. We got a farm bill to go, we got a national defense authorization, and there's very little that gets done on any given day. But this one makes sense, and like I said again, I think from an ideological perspective, perspective, the idea about dollars staying closer to home with elected officials, impacting projects that certainly the federal government should be doing, water treatment plants, those types of things, I think it'll have good bipartisan support. But I think what it does most of anything is it starts to change the narrative on how we can do this. And again, when we got this and started talking about it, just like anything in the world, you're like, wow, this is the greatest idea ever. How come they haven't done it before? It was tried before. It simply wasn't administered the right way or got written up string in the early 1970s. And by all accounts, it was wildly popular. And I think some of the shortcomings it had in it, that we think we have some corrections to that. So this is an idea that's been out there before, and we'll give it all the effort I can. I think the reality on many pieces of legislation that I always say, if you're introducing something that is so absolutely needed and makes such great sense, even Washington won't be able to stop it eventually from happening, because it will take on its own life and it will get done. This one seems to me, because of, again, the organic nature of it, it fits so tightly with what communities need that I think there's a good chance. So,
Do you have any other authors on the bill?
we'll just introduce it now and we'll get them. My job will be to work them up, and my claim to fame is that I have a great track record of getting them on board, and we have some good targets that we'll pull on and get them going.
Yeah, Congressman, you mentioned that the concept didn't work earlier. What kind of funding is necessary from a federal level? Do you have a dollar amount that's?
Yeah.
Because this baby can sit out there, and even if it's implemented, and
That's
it's
right.
not properly funded, it doesn't go anywhere.
That's exactly right. And I think you have a responsibility in leadership to talk about that. It's about $10 to $12 billion is what we think will adequately hit. There'll certainly always be need more. When it comes to infrastructure in these small communities that tell you, we're never going to get to that. We think that makes sense. So we're talking about a 5-year implementation period of between $50 and $60 billion to make sure that's done.
So 10 to 12 per year.
Per year. And the implementation, as Nicole said, very important to do this is, we're creating no new bureaucracy. We're in fact turning that on its head, and it's coming from the ground up. The reason is, and I think it's very important to bring this up, this thing was wildly popular. The reason it failed the first time was they didn't have the safeguards in place, and people abused the system because it was so widely popular that people wanted to do it. We made sure that those safeguards are there, the transparencies, the checks and balances on that are there, but it will be wildly popular again, just like it was then. And then you go to make the case, and I am convinced of this, that people are willing to spend tax dollars if they believe they're fair and they believe they're being targeted where they go.
The second question, I don't know if you have to step away from the podium or ask your staffers to leave or whatever, but it's regarding your campaign for governor.
I can answer that, nobody else can.
Absolutely. If Minnesotans elect you governor, is this something that you would like to see translated over to the
Yes.
state level, or is something like that already there? Can you talk a little
Yes,
bit about that?
yes, and I think, again, I gotta, just to be candid, and I'll speak in this space on it, is, I came and made that decision that I'm trying to seek the honor of representing Minnesota as governor, because I believe that the system is broken, that it's gonna be very difficult for the federal government to do these things, and to be quite honestly with you, I believe there's a role for federalism, obviously, and that's what I've always advocated, but I do believe that the local control, the state control is the way that we're going to get some of this, and I would advocate for it with the safeguards in place to deliver that to it. I think as a governor of any of the 50 states, and as a mayor or a county commissioner anywhere, as Roy said, this came out of 12 years of them telling me what they really wanted to do. Now granted, when you ask a mayor, or I would say you ask a governor, you ask them, they say, just send me all my federal dollars, I'll decide what to do with them. That's kind of the attitude that you would take as you get there. What we're saying is there's a role for the federal government to be in this, but if this money is in, and this money is in USDA, let's find a better, more efficient way to get it closer to it. So I would certainly advocate that, and the role is that the state, we're certainly gonna align things, but the state, again, I think Mayor Steen did this, if you don't share that pain with him, we certainly have to have clean water. We have standards on the water. But he's being asked to hit a mandated standard with absolutely no support whatsoever to do that. And the more you get into rural areas, the more that the tax base shifts to an agricultural, a mining, a forestry tax base, it becomes much more difficult to be able to find out how you're going to do that. So yes, I would certainly advocate.
Just one follow-up, and then I'll shut up after this. If you're governor of Minnesota, and you're saying, let's implement a program similar to this with the same safeguards, what kind of money is it necessary from your reckoning to do this in Minnesota, to do it properly?
Yeah, well, we have the breakdown in here. Peter, you may help me on this, is that our state federal breakdown
Yes.
for what we expect.
In other words, I'm wondering how much out of the state
That's
budget,
right.
what would you propose in your budget?
Well, I would say we would have to 10% of the.
10% of that, so whatever Minnesota's share is going to be of this is what we're looking at. So there is a state and local match. There's an 85% federal that comes out of this, a 10 and a 5, and so that's the way it would be funded.
My question is, how much would need to be kicked in from the state budget to
That
properly
would
fund
figure
this
out whatever
program
our
for
recipient
Minnesota?
number
Is it
is.
hundreds of millions or?
10% of whatever's there,
10%. Yeah.
of the entire
10% of,
pot. Right.
Who decides how much a community gets and whether what they're asking for is reasonable?
Yeah, and I'm gonna ask some staffers here, if you'd introduce yourself on this, asking about how the determination, because we looked at the actual mechanisms of employment, of how the decisions are made. I'm gonna ask them to help us so we get this right on the actual procedure. Can you, Peter, in a minute, can you talk to us about Mayor Serp and his city council has a proposal? What would that process look like till they get to the money? And who's,
So Mayor Serp and his council have a proposal. They will work with their county board through a competitive grant program, and the county board would set up a process at the county level for essentially scoring projects. And so the city of Waseca would engage in the competitive grant program to convince the county board that whatever project they're advocating for is in fact worthy of percentage of the overall 10 million that could come from that county.
and they come up with a number one, who decides whether that's funded or not?
And so the county board is essentially in charge of distributing the funds once USDA Rural Development has released, say, the 10 million to the county.
And so USDA Rural Development is basing it on the criteria that we set
Yep.
that is clear, should be, because it is competitive grant, but it expands the capacity for them to do it without USDA making that final determination. The county board's doing it based on the needs that they have.
At the federal level, there are three main requirements. The first is a public participation plan, and that is in there to ensure that there is transparency, there's accountability. The second is a needs assessment to ensure that the projects or initiatives proposed are part of some critical infrastructure or considered an essential service. That needs assessment is also tied into the third requirement on the federal level, that it be part of a comprehensive economic strategic development plan. That's where SEDS comes in, that's where our Region 9 friends and other commissions such as them come in.
Those are already done.
Right.
And so we have it done, we know what we need, now we're asking the counties to put it in there. What usually happens before is, none of those things mattered all that much when it got to the federal level, where they made the decisions less. I mean, with you, it was a little closer, but for the city, the mayor was always hoping and waiting for it to happen. This now pushes more of that local control to that decision making.
That's correct. So for example, Craig Clark, the city administrator of Austin, the mayor mentioned the wastewater treatment facility challenges they face. They would then take their request to the county and ask for specific assistance from the county. So it's the county commissioners working with the cities and the townships to try and determine how to best distribute that, say, $10 million on an annual basis.
Who makes a request to the federal government? Because this comes from USDA, right? It's kind of a block grant to the county, whichever county, right?
Counties can choose to participate.
Okay, so then they make a request or submit a proposal to the federal government.
Correct, to the USDA Rural Development in the state in which the county
Okay,
exists.
the land.
Am I correct, that's no more bureaucracy, they have that capacity in place because they do that right now?
Yes, Rural Development already has a program. It's, this program would be housed in the Innovation Center in Rural Development. And the Innovation Center is already designed to try and help communities with this long-term economic strategic planning efforts.
And then because of the SEDS, because of the Comprehensive Economic Development Strategy, that already has to happen in place to be designated as an economic development district, so that planning already has to occur. And so this would make sure that all the local elected officials, mayors, county commissioners, et cetera, are being forward-thinking and thought of and being at the table as part of the process to create and update the SEDS annually, so their projects are listed in there. So when something happens like the Medelia fire, you can point to downtown revitalization as one of the strategies that was mentioned, or for water treatment plants, public infrastructure is one of the strategies specifically identified in the regional SEDS.
So it's really the county's responsibility to work with the municipalities and put together a plan and then sell that to the federal overseers, right? Yeah,
That's right.
Kind of am I conceptually understanding?
You're conceptually understanding.
All right.
For the regionalism. And Roy brought up the good point, as a mayor, there's always the fear of this. And the issue, this is already out there already. There are programs to try and do this. The difference in this one is the local regional decision-making and the capacity of them to be able to move that money in a much more flexible or broader way for the economic that fits in that. That's what we were being told by the mayors, that they get so constrained, it was so boxed in, they weren't allowed to do that, and many times it didn't move.
That's correct.
And the state is not involved in this at all, in the sense that the counties are making the proposals directly to the federal government, and that's the interaction that takes place of approval, or is this a normal?
When it comes to oversight and just the criteria for determining which projects or initiatives would be funded, the state does not play a role in that.
Okay, does the state play any role?
There are matching funds.
Oh, yeah, okay, right, the matching funds, okay, I got you. All right.
It's to diffuse that out to the guy, and this is, when you represent rural Minnesota, this bill is a vision forward, but it also comes out of a lot of frustrations of what stops us from getting things done, or feels like getting things done. And so, you asked a good question earlier, I answer it. This is one of being the governor and taking my finger off that and trusting the local leadership to be able to deliver, and that's what they've been asking for. Give us more capacity. Don't come in and mandate to us and then not give us the capacity to fix what we need to fix. We know, we're on this, we want to do that. And that was one of the theories that went behind this, of diffusing some of that. Well, we are certainly grateful for all of your time. We look forward to pushing this. We'll keep you updated on this. Any further information you need, our background information, or once we start collecting co-sponsors and where we're going on this, if you need anything, point of contact is Sarah Severs, and she'll make sure, and Jesse? Got it. The two of you will make sure we get it. Jesse, get it? So give all the information. Thank you all. Thanks, all. Really appreciate it. Get this done. Thanks. Thank you.
Very much, Don.